Hey, Reddit. I've been scrolling through posts here for a while, but I never thought I'd be one of those people sharing a story like this. I'm Brian Welker, 36 years old, recently promoted to shift supervisor at my company. Life's been tough, but I've always handled things with a mix of grit and optimism. I thought I had a handle on it all. Turns out, I didn't. For some context, my wife Brenda and I have been married for 12 years. We've had our ups and downs, but I thought we were solid. I work long hours to provide for us, and when I'm not at work, I've been focusing on a personal project, building a small loft above our garage. My goal was to create a quiet retreat, somewhere I could unwind after stressful days at the plant. Last Saturday, I decided to make some serious progress on the loft. I started early, measuring out beams and installing insulation, feeling proud of how things were shaping up. Brenda had told me she'd be out with friends for the afternoon, so I figured I'd have the place to myself. I was wrong. While I was working upstairs, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I figured Brenda had forgotten something. But instead of hearing the front door open, I heard voices, hers and a man's, laughing. They went into the garage. I froze. Something about the tone of her laughter wasn't right. You know that gut instinct that kicks in when something's off? I stayed quiet, moving carefully to peek through the gap in the unfinished wall. There they were, Brenda and Bill Grant, a co-worker she'd mentioned a few times. She called him just a friend whenever I asked about him. Well, this friend had his arm around her, and the way they looked at each other wasn't friendly. At first, I thought maybe I was overreacting. Maybe they were just, I don't know, messing around in some innocent way. But then Brenda leaned in and kissed him, and I knew. My world shattered in that moment. All the sacrifices I'd made, the trust I'd given her, everything, it felt like a cruel joke. I didn't confront them right then. Instead, I pulled out my phone and hit record. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, but I knew I'd need proof if I wanted answers later. Watching them laugh and talk like I didn't exist, like our marriage was nothing, was the most gut-wrenching thing I've ever experienced. I stayed hidden until they left, and then I sat in the loft for what felt like hours, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. My hands were shaking, and my heart felt like it was going to explode. The loft, once a project of hope and peace, had turned into a nightmare. I haven't told anyone yet, not friends, not family. Brenda doesn't even know I know. I'm still trying to figure out how to confront her or what to do next. My head's a mess, and I feel like I'm spiraling. How do you even start to deal with something like this? Should I confront her right away, or wait until I can think clearly? Thanks for all the responses and advice on my last post. I read through a bunch of them while sitting in my truck outside work. I felt a bit of clarity, like I wasn't completely alone in this. Still, I had no idea how to confront Brenda or what I'd even say. That night, I couldn't sleep. Brenda came home around dinner time, smiling like nothing was wrong. She told me about her afternoon with the girls, even mentioned a funny story about how one of them spilled wine on their dress. I just nodded, pretending to listen, but the anger boiling inside me was hard to keep down. She didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she did and just didn't care. Either way, I knew I couldn't keep it in much longer. The next morning, I got up early. Brenda was still asleep when I set up my phone in the kitchen to record. I wanted a calm, level-headed conversation, if that was even possible, but I also wanted evidence if she tried to deny anything. Once the camera was ready, I made some coffee and waited for her to wake up. When she came into the kitchen, all groggy in her robe, I started. Brenda, we need to talk. She froze for a second, probably because of my tone. I don't usually talk like that, firm, serious. She grabbed a mug and poured herself some coffee, avoiding eye contact. What about? She asked, her voice light but wary. I saw you yesterday, I said, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. She looked up, confused. What do you mean? I was in the loft. I saw you with Bill in the garage. The color drained from her face. For a second, she just stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't decide what to say. Then she forced a laugh. Oh, come on, Brian. Bill was just dropping off some tools for the garden. You're overreacting. I didn't say anything. I just pulled out my phone and hit play on the video. Her face changed instantly. Guilt. Panic. And then somehow defiance. You recorded me? Are you serious right now? That's an invasion of privacy, she snapped, crossing her arms. Privacy. I shot back. You're worried about privacy when you were sneaking around behind my back? You kissed him, Brenda. I saw it. She hesitated, then tried to shift gears. It's not what it looked like, Brian. I swear. It was a mistake. He kissed me, and I pulled away. I paused the video and rewound to the exact moment where she leaned into him. This doesn't look like pulling away to me. Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment, I thought she was about to come clean. But then she sighed dramatically, like I was being unreasonable. Fine, yes, I kissed him. But it didn't mean anything. It was just a stupid moment of weakness. You're always so busy with work and your stupid loft project. I was lonely, Brian. I needed attention, and you weren't giving it to me. That hit like a gut punch. She wasn't even apologizing, just blaming me. I wanted to scream at her, but I held it together. So your solution was to cheat on me? Instead of talking to me, you ran to Bill Grant? The guy who thinks he's God's gift to women. She rolled her eyes. You're making this a bigger deal than it is. It was one kiss. One mistake. I didn't sleep with him, okay? Can we just move on? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Move on? Like she'd accidentally bumped my car in the driveway or forgot my birthday. No, Brenda, we can't just move on. You betrayed me, and now you're acting like it's no big deal. Do you even care about this marriage? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she grabbed her coffee and stormed out of the kitchen, muttering, I can't deal with this right now. I sat there, staring at the empty doorway, feeling like I just lost a fight I didn't even know I was in. The truth was out, but now what? Was I supposed to wait for her to decide whether our marriage was worth saving? Or was this the beginning of the end? I'm still trying to process everything. Do I try counseling, or is that pointless when she's already checked out? Part of me wants to pack my stuff and leave, but I don't even know where I'd go. After the confrontation in the kitchen, Brenda avoided me for the rest of the day. I wasn't even sure if she went out again because I stayed in the garage, pretending to work on the loft. In reality, I was just sitting there, staring at the pile of lumber and tools, trying to figure out what my next move should be. The silence between us stretched into the next morning. I half expected her to leave me a note or send a text, but there was nothing. It wasn't until late afternoon, while I was watching TV, that she finally decided to talk. She walked into the living room and sat on the edge of the couch, carefully keeping her distance from me. Her face was tense, but there was something else there too, maybe fear or guilt. I couldn't tell. Brian, she started, her voice quieter than usual. I've been thinking about what you said. I turned off the TV and looked at her, waiting. I wasn't about to make this easy for her. I'm sorry, she said, looking down at her hands. I messed up, okay? I shouldn't have kissed Bill. It was wrong, and I regret it. It sounded rehearsed, like she'd been practicing in the mirror. There was no emotion behind her words, just a calculated attempt to smooth things over. That's it. I asked. You regret it? Do you even understand what you've done to me, to us? She sighed, like she was the one being burdened. Brian, I've already apologized. What more do you want from me? Do you want me to beg? To grovel? I want the truth, Brenda, I said, leaning forward. Was it really just one kiss? Or are you lying to my face again? Her expression hardened. It was one kiss. I already told you that. What more do you want me to say? I shook my head. I didn't believe her. Not after the way she defended herself so aggressively yesterday. There was more to this, I could feel it. What about the times you said you were working late? Or those weekends you needed space? Were those lies too? I pressed. She flinched at that, but recovered quickly. You're paranoid, Brian. You're blowing this way out of proportion. Am I? I shot back. Because I think you've been lying for a long time, Brenda. And you're still lying now. Her face twisted into a scowl. You know what your problem is? You always want everything to be perfect. Perfect house, perfect job, perfect marriage. But guess what? Life isn't perfect, Brian. People make mistakes. Mistakes. I repeated, my voice rising. Cheating on your husband isn't a mistake, Brenda. It's a choice, a deliberate choice to betray someone who trusted you. She rolled her eyes and stood up, crossing her arms. I'm not going to sit here and let you attack me. I said I'm sorry, and I meant it. But if you're just going to keep throwing this in my face, Maybe we need some space. There it was. The escape route. The moment things got too uncomfortable, she was ready to bolt. You mean you need space to figure out if you're going to keep sneaking around with Bill? I snapped. She glared at me, her jaw tightening. Believe whatever you want, Brian. I can't change your mind. With that, she turned and walked out, leaving me alone in the living room. I sat there for a long time, replaying the conversation in my head, feeling the weight of her indifference settle in my chest. She didn't care. That was the hardest part to accept. She didn't care about what she'd done or how much it had hurt me. To her, this was just another fight, something she could brush off and move past without putting in the effort to fix it. That night, I slept on the couch, staring at the ceiling and wondering how the woman I'd loved for 12 years could turn into a stranger overnight. Was this really who she'd always been, and I'd just been too blind to see it? Tomorrow, I'm calling a lawyer. I don't know if I'm ready to file for divorce, but I need to know my options. Because one thing's clear, Brenda's not interested in rebuilding this marriage. And I don't know if I can keep holding on when she's already let go. The morning after that fight, I woke up feeling like I'd aged 10 years overnight. My back ached from the couch, my head was pounding, and my heart felt like it was carrying the weight of the world. Brenda had already left for work, or at least that's what she said she was doing. I didn't bother texting her to check. Instead, I made a decision. I called a lawyer. The office was small but professional. The lawyer, Mr. Graham, was a straightforward guy in his late 50s, with a calm demeanor that put me at ease. I laid everything out for him, the recording, the confrontation, her lack of remorse. He listened patiently, occasionally jotting notes on a yellow legal pad. When I was done, he leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. Brian, let me be clear. Infidelity doesn't automatically mean you lose everything, but it complicates things. If you're thinking about divorce, we'll need to gather more evidence to protect your interests, especially if there's marital property involved. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Evidence. Proof. The very idea of preparing for a battle against someone I thought I'd spend my life with felt wrong, but what choice did I have? What about counseling? I asked hesitantly. He raised an eyebrow. If you think there's still something to salvage, it's worth a try. But from what you've told me, she doesn't seem committed to rebuilding trust. I'd recommend being cautious and preparing for the worst, even if you hope for the best. I left his office with a heavy heart and a folder full of legal advice. The reality of what I might have to do was setting in, and it scared me. When I got home, I tried to distract myself by cleaning the house. I was scrubbing the kitchen counter when my phone buzzed. It was a notification from our shared cloud storage account. A folder had just been updated. Curious, I opened it. Brenda had a bad habit of syncing her phone to the account and forgetting about it. Most of the time, it was just photos of recipes or screenshots of shopping deals. But this time, there were 2 new pictures. My stomach dropped when I opened the first one. It was a selfie of Brenda and Bill, taken in what looked like a hotel room. They were both smiling, and she had her arm around his neck like it was the most natural thing in the world. The second picture was worse. It was a shot of the 2 of them in bed, his arm draped over her bare shoulder. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My hands shook as I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The timestamp on the photos was from 2 weeks ago, one of those work trips she'd mentioned. I wanted to smash the phone, to scream, to do something to release the rage building inside me. Instead, I saved the photos to a secure folder and logged out of the account. That evening, Brenda came home like nothing had happened. She even smiled at me and asked how my day was. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Brian, are you even listening to me? She said, her tone tinged with annoyance. I looked at her, struggling to keep my voice steady. Do you have anything else to tell me, Brenda? Anything at all? She blinked, caught off guard. What are you talking about? I pulled out my phone and opened the photos, sliding the screen across the counter toward her. Her face went pale as she stared at them. Explain this, I said quietly, my voice cold. She didn't even try to deny it this time. Instead, she let out a shaky breath and said, Brian, I cut her off. Save it. I don't want to hear another excuse or another lie. I gave you a chance to come clean, and you threw it in my face. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't care. For the first time, I felt nothing but anger. I'm done, Brenda. Whatever we had, it's gone. And this, I pointed at the photos, This is the nail in the coffin. She didn't say anything, just stood there, tears streaming down her face as I grabbed my jacket and left the house. I drove aimlessly for hours, my mind racing. There was no coming back from this. I didn't know what the future looked like, but one thing was clear: Brenda and I were finished that night. After hours of driving, I finally pulled into a quiet lot overlooking the river. The glow of the streetlights on the water should have been calming, but I felt like a storm was raging inside me. Everything I thought my life was built on, trust, love, loyalty, was gone. I spent most of the night sitting there, staring at the water, until exhaustion forced me to head home. When I walked in, the house was silent. Brenda was already in bed, or at least pretending to be. I didn't bother checking. Instead, I grabbed a pillow and blanket and crashed on the couch again. The next morning, I woke up to Brenda pacing in the living room, her phone in hand. She looked disheveled, like she hadn't slept either. When she noticed I was awake, she stopped and just stared at me for a moment. "We need to talk," she said, her voice shaky. "No, Brenda," I replied firmly. "We needed to talk yesterday. Now? There's nothing left to say." She flinched at that, but pushed on. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But can we at least try to work through this? For us? For everything we've built together." I laughed bitterly. "Everything we've built? Brenda, you didn't just hurt me. You destroyed our marriage. And you didn't care enough to stop. You only care now because you got caught." She started crying again, but it didn't move me this time. I wasn't trying to be cruel, but I had no more sympathy left to give. "I've already talked to a lawyer," I said, standing up. "I don't know how this is going to end, but I'm not just going to sit here and pretend everything's fine." Brenda's face crumpled, and she sank onto the couch, sobbing. For a brief second, I felt a pang of guilt. But then I remembered those photos, and the guilt was replaced by a cold, hard resolve. By the end of the week, the cracks in our facade were visible to everyone. I wasn't wearing my wedding ring anymore, and Brenda wasn't exactly hiding her misery. The neighbors must have noticed, because one of them, Karen, stopped me while I was checking the mail. "Hey Brian," she said cautiously, her voice low. "I hope you don't mind me asking, but is everything okay with you and Brenda?" I hesitated, unsure how much to say. Karen was nice enough, but she also had a reputation for being the neighborhood gossip. "We're going through some things," I said vaguely, hoping to leave it at that. She gave me a knowing look. "Well, if you ever need to talk, you know where to find me." I nodded politely and went back inside, but my gut told me she wasn't done digging. Home was a mess, work wasn't much better. As a shift supervisor, I'm supposed to be the guy who keeps things running smoothly. But lately, I've been distracted, and it's starting to show. One of my coworkers, Mike, pulled me aside during a break. "You okay, man? You've been off your game lately," he said, concern in his eyes. I wanted to brush him off, but the weight of everything was too much. "It's personal stuff. Brenda and I are having problems." Mike nodded, his expression sympathetic. "Sorry to hear that, man. If you need to vent, I'm here." I managed a weak smile. "Thanks. I appreciate it." But even as I tried to focus on work, I couldn't stop replaying everything in my head. The lies, the betrayal, the fallout. The next bombshell came that evening. My phone rang while I was eating a sandwich, and the caller ID showed an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hello. Brian?" a woman's voice asked cautiously. "Yes. Who's this?" "This is Laura Grant," she said. "Bill's wife." Her words hit me like a freight train. I didn't even know Bill was married. I don't know what to say," I stammered. "I found out about Brenda and Bill," she continued, her voice trembling. "I saw the texts on his phone. I thought you should know." "I already know," I replied, my tone flat. "I caught them." There was a pause, and then she let out a shaky breath. "I don't know what to do. We have kids. I can't just throw everything away." Her words cut deep, because they mirrored my own fears. "I'm sorry," I said. "I wish I had answers for you. But right now, I'm just trying to figure out what comes next." We ended the call soon after, but her words stayed with me. How do you rebuild your life after something like this? Especially when there's so much collateral damage. I don't know what the future holds, but one thing's clear: Brenda isn't the person I thought she was. And as much as it hurts, I can't let her drag me down any further. For now, I'm taking it one day at a time. But the road ahead feels impossibly long. The call from Bill's wife lingered in my mind all night. Knowing she was dealing with the same betrayal hit hard, but it also gave me a strange sense of clarity. I couldn't keep living in this limbo. The next morning, Brenda tried to act normal again, but I wasn't playing along. "We need to figure out what's next," I told her, my voice steady but firm. "This can't keep dragging on." She hesitated, then sat down across from me. "I don't want to lose you, Brian," she said softly, tears forming again. "I know I made mistakes, but I want to fix this." Her words sounded sincere, but I couldn't shake the image of her and Bill together. "Fixing this would have started with honesty," I replied. "And I'm not sure I can trust you anymore." We talked, or maybe argued, for over an hour. In the end, I told her I was moving into the guest room while I figured things out. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it felt like a necessary step. "I'll try to give you space," she said as I walked away. But for the first time, her voice sounded uncertain, like she finally understood this might really be the end. For me, it already feels like it is. Moving into the guest room was more symbolic than anything. It wasn't much of a separation, but it made things clear. We weren't us anymore. Brenda seemed to be walking on eggshells, trying to tiptoe around me, but the damage was already done. The first night in the guest room, I barely slept. The house was too quiet, and my thoughts wouldn't stop racing. Around 2 a.m., I heard Brenda crying in our bedroom. Part of me wanted to go to her, comfort her like I always did, but I couldn't. Not this time. At work, people started noticing the strain. Mike asked me again if I was okay, and I gave him the same vague answer. "Just dealing with stuff at home." "That makes two of us," he said with a grim chuckle. I didn't press him, but it reminded me that everyone's carrying something. By the end of the week, Brenda tried to talk again. "I don't want us to live like this, Brian. Can't we at least try counseling?" Her suggestion caught me off guard. I didn't think she'd want to face a therapist and admit what she'd done. "I'll think about it," I said. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. Right now, I need more time to figure out what I even want. But I know one thing for sure, nothing will ever be the same. Brenda kept pushing for counseling. She brought it up at dinner, in passing while I grabbed coffee, even texted me about it while I was at work. I couldn't tell if it was genuine remorse or just a desperate attempt to save face. One night, after another awkward silent dinner, I finally gave in. "Fine. Let's try counseling," I said flatly. Her eyes lit up with relief, but I wasn't sharing her optimism. "Thank you," she said softly, reaching for my hand. I pulled away, not ready for that kind of closeness. We had our first session a few days later. The therapist, a calm middle-aged woman named Dr. Harris, asked us to start by explaining why we were there. "I messed up," Brenda said quickly. "I broke Brian's trust, and I want to fix things." Dr. Harris nodded, then turned to me. "How do you feel about what Brenda said?" "Honestly," I began, "I don't know if there's anything left to fix. She didn't just break my trust, she shattered it. And now, every apology feels like an excuse." Brenda flinched but stayed quiet. The session continued, with Dr. Harris guiding us through what felt like an emotional minefield. Brenda cried, I stayed stoic, and by the end, I was more drained than hopeful. On the drive home, Brenda tried to talk. "I know it's going to take time, Brian, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes." I nodded but didn't respond. I wasn't sure if I believed her, or if I even wanted to try. Counseling might give us clarity, but deep down, I wondered if I was just prolonging the inevitable. The counseling sessions became a weekly routine. Each one felt like peeling back a layer of an onion, revealing things I didn't necessarily want to see or feel. Brenda was fully engaged, crying when she spoke about how lonely she'd felt, apologizing for not coming to me instead of turning to Bill. On the surface, she seemed remorseful, but something about her words felt hollow, like she was following a script. Dr. Harris kept things structured, asking us to communicate honestly and openly, but every session left me more frustrated than the last. One evening after counseling, Brenda tried again to reconnect. "I know you're hurting," she said as I sat in the guest room. "But don't you see? I'm trying to make things right." I didn't look up from my laptop. "Trying doesn't erase what you did. And honestly, I'm not sure if I even want to forgive you." Her shoulders slumped, and she bit her lip. "Do you really think this is the end for us? After everything we've been through?" "That's the problem," I said, shutting the laptop. "We've been through so much, and you still chose to betray me." What does that say about our future? She had no answer. She just stood there for a moment before walking away. The following week brought a new, unwelcome twist. At work, I found out Bill was transferred to a different branch. Not surprising, given the mess between us. But that didn't stop him from showing up at a mutual coworker's going-away party. I almost didn't go, but Mike convinced me. You can't let him dictate where you go, man. You've got every right to be there. So I went. And of course there he was, standing near the bar, laughing with a group of people like he didn't have a care in the world. When he saw me, his smile faltered for a second before he composed himself and walked over. "Brian," he said, holding out his hand like we were old buddies. I stared at it, then at him. "Bill." My tone was cold enough to make him drop his hand. "Look, man, I know things got complicated," he began, his voice low. "But I never meant for any of this to happen. Didn't mean for it to happen." I snapped, keeping my voice steady but firm. "You didn't accidentally have an affair with my wife, Bill. That was a choice, a deliberate choice." He had the audacity to look offended. "It wasn't like that. We were both in a bad place." "Save it," I cut him off. "I don't care about your excuses. Just stay out of my life." Before he could respond, Mike appeared by my side. "Everything okay here?" he asked, his tone making it clear he wasn't just being polite. Bill muttered something about not wanting trouble and walked away. I felt a surge of gratitude for Mike, who clapped me on the shoulder and said, "You handled that better than I would've." When I got home, Brenda was waiting for me in the kitchen. "How was the party?" she asked casually, but I could tell she was fishing for information. "Fine," I said, pouring myself a glass of water. Bill was there. Her eyes widened. "Did you talk to him?" "Briefly. Told him to stay out of my life." She looked down, her fingers fiddling with the edge of her sweater. I didn't know he'd be there. I'm sorry if that made things harder for you." "It didn't," I said bluntly. "I've already decided he doesn't matter." Her gaze flicked up to meet mine, and for a second, I thought I saw relief. "Brian, I want you to know I've cut all ties with him. I blocked his number, deleted his contact info. It's over." I nodded, not sure if I believed her. Trust wasn't something I could give easily anymore, not to her. But later that night, as I lay in the guest room, I thought about something Dr. Harris had said during our last session. Healing doesn't happen overnight. It's a process, and sometimes, the hardest part is deciding whether to stay or go. I didn't have an answer yet, but I was starting to realize that staying might require more strength than I had left to give over the next few days. Brenda stuck to her usual pattern. Cooking dinner, tidying up, making small talk as if pretending everything was fine could undo what had been done. But I could see the cracks in her mask. She was walking on eggshells, trying to gauge my mood every time we were in the same room. For my part, I wasn't doing much better. The counseling sessions were draining, and every interaction with Brenda felt like a minefield. One wrong word, and I'd find myself spiraling into anger or frustration. It didn't help that Bill's smug face kept popping into my thoughts, a constant reminder of how far things had fallen apart. On Thursday, Dr. Harris assigned us a new exercise. Each of us was supposed to write a letter explaining how we felt and what we wanted moving forward. The goal, she said, was to put everything on the table without interruptions or defensiveness. Brenda seemed eager about it, but I dreaded the task. What was I supposed to write? That I felt betrayed, humiliated, and utterly lost? That I wasn't sure if I could ever forgive her, let alone trust her again? Still, I sat down that evening with a notebook and a pen, staring at the blank page. The words didn't come easily. Every sentence felt too raw, too real, like exposing a wound that hadn't even begun to heal. At the next session, Brenda was the first to read her letter. Her voice wavered as she spoke, but her words were steady. "Brian, I know I hurt you more than I can ever make up for. I don't expect forgiveness overnight, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to rebuild what we had. I miss the way we used to laugh together, the way you always made me feel safe and loved. I know I threw that away, and I hate myself for it. But I still believe in us, and I hope you do too." She sniffled, wiping at her eyes as she finished. Dr. Harris nodded encouragingly, then turned to me. "Brian, are you ready to share your letter?" I hesitated, my hands gripping the notebook tightly. "Yeah," I said finally, clearing my throat. "Brenda, when I look at you now, I don't see the woman I married. I see someone I don't recognize, someone who lied to me, betrayed me, and made me question everything I thought we had. I want to believe that we can move past this, but I don't know if that's possible. Every time I look at you, I see the images of you with him. Every time you speak, I wonder if you're telling the truth. You say you miss the way things were, but so do I. And the hardest part is knowing that those days are gone, and they might never come back. When I finished, the room was silent. Brenda was staring at me, her expression a mix of shock and pain. Dr. Harris spoke gently. Thank you both for sharing. Brian, that kind of honesty is difficult, but it's necessary. Brenda, how does hearing this make you feel? Brenda took a shaky breath. It hurts. But I understand why he feels that way. I just wish I knew how to make it better. Dr. Harris nodded. Rebuilding trust takes time, and it's clear that both of you are struggling to navigate this. The question is whether you're both willing to put in the work, knowing there are no guarantees. On the drive home, Brenda was unusually quiet. Normally, she'd try to dissect the session, asking what I thought or how we could improve. But this time, she just stared out the window, lost in her own thoughts. I didn't press her. I had enough of my own doubts to deal with. Was I wasting my time trying to salvage something that was already broken beyond repair? Or was I too angry to see the possibility of a future together? That night, as I lay awake in the guest room, a thought struck me. Maybe counseling wasn't about saving the marriage. Maybe it was about figuring out if there was anything left worth saving. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. The silence between Brenda and me grew heavier after the counseling session. She tried to act normal, made coffee, asked about my day, but the air between us was different. She wasn't as confident, and I wasn't as angry. That night, she approached me in the guest room. Do you even want to try anymore? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her question caught me off guard. For weeks, she'd been pushing to fix things, but now she sounded like she was bracing for the worst. I don't know, I admitted. I've been asking myself the same thing. Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded like she'd expected that answer. I wish I could undo it all, she said. I know, I replied, my voice softening. But some things can't be undone. We sat in silence after that, neither of us knowing what to say. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Just tired after that conversation. Things felt different, quieter, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of quiet that hangs over you when two people know they're at a crossroads, but are too afraid to take the next step. Brenda didn't bring up counseling again, and I didn't push. Instead, we both seemed to settle into this awkward, unspoken routine. She stayed out of the guest room, and I avoided lingering in the kitchen or living room when she was there. It felt like we were coexisting rather than living as husband and wife. One night, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. There was Brenda smiling at a family barbecue, us hiking on our anniversary, her holding the cat we'd adopted when we first moved in together. Each photo felt like a snapshot of another life, a happier, simpler one. By the time I looked up, it was past midnight. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to find in those pictures, but all they left me with was a hollow ache. The next day, Brenda surprised me with an invitation. I was thinking we could have dinner together tonight, she said hesitantly. I raised an eyebrow. We eat dinner together almost every night. No, she said quickly, shaking her head. I mean, not just eating. I want to actually sit down with you. Talk. Just us. I hesitated, unsure if I wanted to go down this road. But her expression was so earnest, so desperate, that I finally nodded. All right. She smiled, a flicker of hope crossing her face. Thank you. I'll cook something special. When I came home that evening, the house smelled like roasted garlic and fresh herbs. Brenda had set the dining table with candles and even pulled out the good silverware, the ones we hadn't used since Thanksgiving 2 years ago. Wow, I said, feeling a little out of place. This is a lot. She gave me a nervous smile. I just wanted to remind us of better times. The meal was impressive: steak, roasted potatoes, and a salad with homemade dressing. But the tension in the room made it hard to enjoy. Brenda kept glancing at me, waiting for some kind of reaction. After a few minutes of silence, she finally spoke. Do you remember the first time we had dinner like this? That little Italian place in the city? I nodded. Yeah. You ordered that weird mushroom thing and hated it. She laughed softly. I only ordered it because you said it looked interesting. I didn't want to seem boring. I smirked. You've never been boring. Her smile faded slightly, and she looked down at her plate. I miss those days, Brian. When everything felt easy. When we were us. Her words hung in the air, heavy and unresolved. I wanted to tell her I missed those days too. But the truth was, I wasn't sure if we could ever get back to that place after dinner. We moved to the couch. Brenda handed me a glass of wine and sat down next to me, closer than she had in weeks. Do you think we can ever be happy again? She asked quietly, her voice breaking. I took a sip of the wine, stalling for time. I don't know, I admitted. I think part of me wants to try, but another part, it's just hard to imagine trusting you again. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. I'll do whatever it takes, Brian. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to earn it. Her sincerity hit me harder than I expected. For a moment, I almost believed her. But then the doubts crept back in, whispering all the reasons why this might just be too far gone. I need time, I said finally, to figure out what I want. What we want. She nodded, wiping at her eyes. I understand. Just, don't give up on us yet. I didn't respond, and we sat there in silence, the weight of everything we'd lost pressing down on us. The dinner didn't fix anything, but it felt like a small step forward, or maybe just a pause in the chaos. Brenda seemed more determined than ever to prove she was serious about making things right, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental between us had been broken. For now, I'm taking things one day at a time. Maybe that's all I can do. The days after our dinner felt calmer. Brenda seemed more grounded, almost like she'd found a purpose in trying to win me back. But while her actions were softer, more considerate, my heart still felt guarded. Trust isn't something you rebuild overnight, no matter how many candles or heartfelt promises are involved. Then came the knock on the door. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was working on the loft again, finding solace in the mindless rhythm of hammering nails and measuring beams. Brenda called out from downstairs. Brian. Someone's here to see you. I climbed down the ladder and froze when I saw who it was. Laura Grant, Bill's wife. She stood on the porch, her face pale but resolute. Brenda lingered in the background, clearly confused. I stepped outside and shut the door behind me, leaving Brenda inside. Laura, I said cautiously. What are you doing here? I needed to talk to you, she said, her voice trembling slightly. About Bill and Brenda. There's something you need to know. We walked a few steps away from the house, out of earshot. Laura's hands were clasped tightly in front of her, her knuckles white. I thought you should know, she began, her eyes darting toward the ground. He's been seeing someone else too. I found out a few days ago. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Someone else? While he was with Brenda. She nodded. Yes. I confronted him, and he admitted it. He said it started after you found out. Apparently, Brenda ended things and he moved on. I felt a strange mix of emotions, anger, disbelief, and a hollow sense of vindication. So Brenda had cut him off like she claimed. But Bill, true to his character, hadn't missed a beat. Why are you telling me this? I asked, not unkindly. Because I think it changes things, she said, her voice firm. I don't know if Brenda told you everything, but maybe she wasn't the only one keeping secrets. Her words stayed with me long after she left that evening. I sat across from Brenda at the kitchen table. She was scrolling through her phone, looking far more relaxed than she had in weeks. Did you know Bill was seeing someone else? I asked suddenly. She froze, her eyes snapping to mine. What? No. What are you talking about? Laura came by today, I said, watching her closely. She told me Bill admitted to seeing someone else after you two ended things. Brenda's face turned red, a mix of anger and embarrassment. I didn't know that, she said quickly. And honestly, I don't care. He's not my problem anymore. But he was, I countered. For months, he was your problem, and mine. So forgive me if I find it hard to believe you didn't suspect anything. She slammed her phone down on the table, her frustration boiling over. What do you want from me, Brian? I've told you everything. I've done everything I can to fix this. If you want to hate me forever, fine. But don't drag this back up just to punish me again. Her outburst caught me off guard. For a moment, I just stared at her, unsure how to respond. I don't want to punish you, Brenda, I said finally. I want the truth. All of it. Because until I have that, we're just spinning our wheels here. She sighed, her anger deflating. I've told you everything I know. If you don't believe me, that's on you. Later that night, I found myself back in the loft, staring at the unfinished walls. The conversation with Laura, Brenda's reaction, it all swirled in my head, leaving me more confused than ever. For weeks, I'd been waiting for some kind of clarity, some sign that would tell me what to do. But now, I was starting to wonder if clarity was even possible. Maybe the real question wasn't whether Brenda and I could rebuild. Maybe it was whether I even wanted to try. The visit from Laura left me unsettled. Brenda acted like she didn't care about Bill anymore, but her reaction felt off, too defensive. It only deepened my doubts. The next evening, we sat in the living room, the silence between us unbearable. Finally, Brenda broke it. "Do you even want to stay married to me, Brian?" she asked, her voice trembling. I looked at her, my chest tightening. "I don't know," I admitted. "Every time I think about what you did, I feel like I'm standing in quicksand." She blinked back tears but didn't argue. Instead, she whispered, "I'm trying to fix it, Brian, but I can't do it alone." I nodded, more out of habit than agreement. But deep down, I was starting to realize that maybe fixing this wasn't what I wanted anymore. A week after Laura's visit, the tension in the house reached its peak. Brenda tried to continue with counseling and daily routines, but her efforts felt more like a desperate attempt to hold onto something that was already slipping away. I wasn't innocent either. I shut down emotionally, avoiding deeper conversations and burying myself in work and the loft project. One evening, as I was cleaning up after dinner, Brenda came into the kitchen. She looked exhausted, her face pale and drawn. "Brian, we can't keep living like this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I turned to face her, leaning against the counter. "I know." She hesitated, her hands wringing nervously. "Do you still love me?" The question hit like a punch to the gut. I wanted to say yes, to cling to the memory of what we once had. But I couldn't lie, not to her, and not to myself. "I don't know," I said finally. "I think I love the idea of us, the memories, the life we built. But right now, I don't know if I can feel that way again." Her lip trembled, but she nodded. "I don't blame you," she said softly. I hate that I ruined this. I hate that I hurt you." For a moment, we stood there in silence, the weight of her words filling the room. Then she took a deep breath, like she was preparing herself for something. "Maybe it's time we let go," she said, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. "I can't keep trying to fix something you don't believe in anymore." Her words hung in the air, heavy and final. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger or resentment, just a deep, aching sadness. We spent the next few weeks sorting through the logistics, dividing the house, the bank accounts, the little pieces of a shared life that no longer fit. Brenda moved in with her sister temporarily, while she figured out her next steps. The day she left, she stood in the doorway with her bags, looking back at me one last time. "I'm sorry, Brian," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I know," I replied. "I'm sorry too." And then she was gone. The house felt empty without her, but in a way, it was also a relief. I spent my first night alone sitting in the loft, looking out at the stars through the unfinished window. It wasn't peaceful, not yet, but it felt like the beginning of something. The pain of betrayal doesn't vanish overnight. There are still moments when I wonder if I could have fought harder, done more to save what we had. But deep down, I know we both needed this ending to find ourselves again. Some people might call it failure, but I'm learning to see it as a new beginning. For now, I'm focused on rebuilding my home, my life, and maybe one day my heart. And while I don't know what the future holds, I know this much: I'll never settle for anything less than honesty and respect again. That's one promise I intend to keep.